The Hebrew word for wilderness is one of my absolute favorite Hebrew words in terms of kind of double meaning and things like that. Hi everyone, this is R.A. Sweeney here to talk a little bit more about some biblical language word study. So when we look at the word for wilderness in Hebrew, it's almost always referred to as midbar. There are a few other associated words, like words for like the field and things like that are away from cities, but the word that actually means wilderness is usually midbar. Which is an interesting word. It's actually kind of compounded and conjugated a little bit. The root is dabar, which is the Hebrew word for word. Or it gets used for like word, speech. It can be like thing. So like there's places where if I was to say like that, the thing we were talking about, I'd say the word we were talking about and use that dabar. And so it's rooted in the Hebrew word for word, which when we look at like the 10 commandments in Hebrew are called the 10 words. And words gets used a lot in the Hebrew scriptures talking about God speaking. It was God's word that shaped creation. He spoke in the Genesis 1 account, God spoke 10 times, and through those 10 acts of speaking over the course of 6 days, he turned chaos into the Garden of Eden. And so it really has this idea when it's applied to God's word of the ability to shape things into an orderly life, providing abundant life sort of situation. So that's really that's interesting, I feel like, to just kind of note that's how it gets applied to God, is that words create abundant life. They shape the world to God's will. But we've got essentially in English it'd be our letter M. In Hebrew it's a mem. But we've got this M sound on the beginning of that dabar. So it's midbar. So mem dabar. And when you put an M on the front of a Hebrew word, it can do a couple different things. One thing that it can do is it can say from that thing. So in this case, if I'm using the mem there to say from, midbar would be away from the words. But it can also kind of like the thing that is characterized by whatever that is. So in that case, midbar would be something like the thing that the words are about, or something like that. So the thing of the words, the man of the words, the place of the words, those sorts of things. So then bring both of those ideas. So it could be away from the words. It could be like the place or the person or the thing of the words. And then that idea of God uses his word to shape and order creation. When you bring all those to the idea of the wilderness, you've got the wilderness is depicted not as a great place in the Bible in a lot of different ways. Like it's not a garden. It is not a city. It is not a place where humans really thrive. There's not food and shelter and water and all the things that you need. So it's this dangerous place. But it's also the place where you see like God gives the Torah to Moses up on Mount Sinai when the people are out in the wilderness. Jesus is taken out into the wilderness, kind of paralleling that Moses story. Like he's, receiving the Torah, and exactly how you want to interpret that. There's a lot of different ways, but it's at least mirroring the story. So the wilderness is kind of this place where God pulls you out from everything and has these special moments with you. I mean, Elijah goes out into the wilderness, again to Mount Sinai, and encounters God. There's a lot of these moments where encounters with God happen in the wilderness. And so in a way, I can look at it and say, this is away from the word. It's not the garden that God created. It is the place that has not been shaped by any sort of creative ordering, structuring effort, whether God's or anyone else's. So it's this uncultivated and just chaotic land. In another way, I can say that it's like exile. You're away from God's creative work, and God sends people out into the wilderness. He reverts mighty nations to being a wilderness. He's taking away his ordering, his life and abundance and those sorts of things. But in the cultural worldview that they would have lived in when the Bible is written, there at least would have been an understanding. Whether or not the Jews believed it or not, I'm not going to argue because I wasn't there, but there's at least in that cultural worldview, everybody has different gods. And to assume that if I'm talking to, a Midianite or an Ammonite or whoever, I'm not going to talk to them necessarily that their gods aren't real. I'm just going to say, my God's way better than your God, because they don't care anything about my God. If I say yours isn't real, mine is, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? So it's kind of this implied understanding of multiple gods that all would be trying to shape creation to their will. And so the wilderness can also be a place where you're drawn out from other ways that the world has been shaped. So when God takes the Israelites out of Egypt, he's taking them out of that Egyptian worldview, the Egyptian structure, the world that is characterized by the Egyptian gods and thinking and mentality and all of those sorts of things. I'm taking you away from the social construct that you're in. I'm bringing you out into this kind of void space to let's reshape and reorder. And so it's interesting because it can be an exile from God, but it can also be a rescue out of the wrong shaping, the wrong construct that you're in, so that you can be transformed and be given God's word again. And so that's where the place of the words would come in. So you're away from the words that you were in, and now you're in the place where the words can be applied to you. And so I feel like it's just kind of a lot of different ways that you could translate the word, understand the word, apply the word. And I feel like they all kind of come together in this idea of you get removed from the ordering that you were in, and you come to a place where you're now ready to receive a new sort of ordering and a new structuring and be transformed in the wilderness. So I think that's really cool how the word midbar plays out. I hope this was a blessing for all of you. If you've got more words that you want to look at or anything like that, please let me know in the comments. Subscribe so that you can check out everything that we're doing with different sorts of word plays and nuances of language in the Bible. So hope you appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.